Anybody not have access to one? There's a couple extra ones here in the front. Pass those around. Those back. This is a really long passage, so it would take about 10 minutes to read it. So we're not going to do that. I'm going to give a little bit of a Reader's Digest version of what happens in the beginning, and we're going to focus in the middle here. This is a very famous story, obviously. So Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha, are good friends of Jesus. And Lazarus falls ill, so the sisters send a message to Jesus, and they say, Lazarus, whom you love, is ill. Now, just to pause there for a moment, why do you suppose they send this message? Pardon? To have Jesus heal him. So to do that, normally what would one expect Jesus to say, do? Come. Yes, but he does not immediately come. He spouts off about God being glorified, and no big deal, it's not going to lead to death, and then he delays for another couple days. He finally does go, but by this time, Lazarus has been entombed for 4 days, and the sisters are being comforted by their mourners. So he's walking toward and into a situation where everyone is in grief, deep despair, sorrow. And here's where we'll pick up where we're going to read. If you're looking at a Bible, it's John 11:20. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, and Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, just even here, what do we know about the kind of relationship that Martha has with Jesus? Her first thing out of her mouth is, if you'd been here, he would not have died. What does that tell us about Jesus' relationship with Martha? She's comfortable getting up in his grill, right? Yeah, like there is clearly a kind of intimacy with them. And how would you describe that first line? What do you think is in that line? Anger, grief, right? She's maybe, what else, perhaps? Disappointment.
She's also trusting that he would have killed her.
There's a lot of trust. Maybe some confusion, like.
Understands who he is, right? She understands his power.
She understands his power, and you're close to power, good buddies with power, and you would expect him to have responded quickly. So she may also be kind of confused and flustered, and obviously is also angry and in grief. And all of these emotions are coming out in this comment to him. But then she says, but even now, with Lazarus 4 days dead, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Talk about trust. Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, yeah, I will. I know he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus says to her, some of the most famous lines in all of the Gospel of John. Let's just read that part together, right? The bold. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. How confident does Jesus sound here? And how do you describe this kind of language? Maybe a little cocky, right? It's I am the resurrection and the life. Like, not only resurrection on the last day, but I am the resurrection and the life. If you're familiar with John, right, there's a series of I am sayings throughout the Gospel of John. Some think that this alludes to Jesus, sort of hinting to his divinity. This I am saying is kind of one of the biggies, right? I am the resurrection and the life. Cocky, what else? I mean, what? A little narcissistic. Yeah, you hope he's pulling through because, woo, delusions of grandeur, right? This is actually, and then he says to her, do you believe this? And Mary says to him, Lord, yes, Lord, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Just as a note, these words, so I know we have some folks who are Catholic or used to sojourn among Catholics. Does anyone know when these words are often read? Any guesses? Sometimes at a funeral. They were read over my father as he was dying by the priest. This is the text. That section of the gospel is what we called the priest because my dad was Catholic. And within a couple days of him dying, we called the priest, and this is what he proclaimed over my dad. This is about as big as it gets in terms of the promise. Very triumphalistic almost. I mean, you talked about cocky, right? Confident, narcissistic if you can't pull it off. And Martha seems to have a lot of confidence. I mean, she's all in. She's like, I'm frustrated with you, but I know that you can do something. So when she'd said this, she goes back and she called her sister Mary and tells her privately, the teacher is here and calling for you. So apparently Jesus wants to speak to Mary as well. And when Mary came and to where Jesus was, she knelt at his feet and says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, so this trend, right, both of them have this same kind of frustration. But what else do we notice about Mary here? She what? Yeah, she kneels before him, right? She shows him a kind of respect and intimacy simultaneously. The kind of relationship that Jesus has with Mary and Martha, I'll just say in general, the relationships that Jesus has with women, if you notice this, speaking as a woman, there aren't a lot of very powerful men who might say semi-narcissistic things who seem to have navigated their relationships with women and intimacy really well. Mary and Martha both feel very comfortable with him. This is something you notice if you read through the Gospels. Women who he befriends seem to know that they're okay with him, even to be intimate with him, but not sexualized, not intimate in a way that is gross. And I'll just say, as a woman who has been around a lot of powerful men, I've not always experienced that. And we kind of gloss over that. But I think that's an important tell about the kind of person that Jesus is. Not just for them, right? Because just to say, right, we think Jesus is here for us. This is the kind of God, the kind of person that God inhabits. This is what God looks like. God's not like those other men or those kind of gross catcalling whatevers, right? He can both have power and not manipulate others, particularly women, who he also, breaks some boundaries actually with women culturally at times, and that frustrates other men, but not in a kind of weird sex way, which is unusual. I mean, okay, it's not, you know what I mean, right? Yeah. So, now we get to this really strange part. So she says, Lord, if you'd been here, you would not have died, he would not have died. Both similar sorts of things. Now, here is the problematic text for me. So listen carefully to what happens next. So remember, Jesus has just given this really triumphalistic, I am the resurrection and the life, like, I got this, death, no problem, we're good. Then, Jesus sees her weeping. So clearly she's not just talking to him. What is she also doing? She's crying. She's devastated, right? She's lost her brother that she loves. She's confused about why her friend didn't come. So when Jesus sees her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, because remember, those people have come to comfort them, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And he says, "Where have you laid him?" And they tell him, "Lord, come and see." Now, here's the line. What's that next line? Read that next line together. And Jesus began to weep. So here's the question. Why? I'm the resurrection and life. He who believes in me shall never die. Ba-da-da-da, right? It's all going to be fine. But Jesus looks at Mary weeping before him, looks at all these people crying. You've been to a funeral? You've been to a memorial? Jesus is, and somebody starts to cry at the funeral. What does everybody do? I lose it. So why? So he may be weeping over his own, or over what he has caused, quote unquote. I mean, he doesn't directly cause it, right? But he, quote, allows it to happen. What else? Why do you think why does he weep? And by the way, this is Middle Eastern weeping. This isn't, Aaron's Euro-American hide, like, keep it all together until we get home. Unfortunately, we've seen way too many pictures of what it looks like in Middle Eastern culture. That's what's happening here. I had a friend who was Lebanese, and she would, when we acted out certain texts like this one, she actually did the weeping and the trill that, I don't know if you've heard this, but women actually have a particular way that they will cry. And it's very loud. And it's very moving. That's what he's seeing and responding to. What were you going to say, Jen?
I was going to say, to answer your question, like, why? I mean, who knows, right? But, like, I wonder if it's as Jesus experiencing humanity, even though he just talks about the resurrection, he knows that Lazarus, even if he's not going to give him life again, will have a second life. But he's understanding the loss that humans go through when our loved ones die, right? Like, in a different way that he didn't experience in God, right? Like, he's understanding that here are all these people that have lost somebody they love.
Yeah. No, exactly. He's all in on what the result of his decision, okay, maybe in his head, he'd figured this all out. Maybe like us, right? We know it's all going to work out. But Jesus is simply, utterly, sheerly human, present to the moment, and sees what death does, feels what death does. And he loses it. And doesn't lose it like a polite Euro-American buttoned-up guy. He weeps like the Middle Eastern Jew that he is. And John's gospel, of course, is full of these kinds of juxtapositions of Jesus. This kind of confidence, this kind of almost over-the-top language, and this just sheer humanity of Jesus. And what we believe as Christians, and this is in the Common English Bible, the one that our church often uses. Do you remember how we translate the Son of Man? The human one. Why? Why do we translate the human one? What's Jesus supposed to be for us? Who is Jesus for us? Jesus isn't just divine. Jesus is what the fully human looks like. To put on my geeky theological hat. Part of why the church finally decided this weird equation that Jesus had to be 100% God and 100% human was in part to explain how he could be perfectly human. How do you live into being a faithful, full human being? And that's what Jesus is giving us here. This is what it means to be human. And even to be a person of faith and be human means to be willing to stop in the midst of all of this triumphalistic sureness. Our belief, very important in John's gospel, right? Cycles of belief and unbelief. We believe, most days, some days, right? To be human, though, you could take out this middle part, right? You don't need it. You could just move from triumph to triumph. Remember, he's like, hey, I got this. I'm going to delay a couple days. I mean, you're pointing out that, he seems to have caused it in the first place, so why is he so upset, right? This is a model of what it means to be human. And maybe what it means to be people of faith. If Jesus himself pauses to grieve what death does, that's what we need to do too. It's why I would argue that Christians have expensive hope. It's expensive because cheap hope, I would say, isn't hope. Why do you have to have hope to begin with? What is hope? Why do you have to have hope? If you've had to have hope, really big hopes, why do you have to have hope? Why did Daniel pick that particular song right now about love conquering all? Which a part of me is like, oh, yeah, well, maybe. I don't know. Is there anybody else out there that's like the jaded? Why do we have to sing that song? Why was Daniel like, this is a great time to sing this song? Because what? Pain, brokenness. What here? No, there's not a lot of hope out there, is there? I mean, for those of us who actually look at the news, right? Sometimes in our own personal lives, we're a mess. Or our own personal lives, our families, our interior life, it doesn't look so good. And bluntly, there's me aging every day, right? More and more evident. I always say to my students, as a person who grew up in LA and a woman, that's a little rough, right? I'm pretty much reminded all the time. I look at, even Christy Nome, and you're like, wow, you look better than you did 5 years ago. I mean, not right, maybe right now, it's not so simple, but, right? I mean, everyone seems to be and knows that aging is not a good thing, because what happens when we age? You hurt? That's right. Things you didn't even know you had hurt. That's the second half of life group. But the second half means what? I'm in my second half, meaning I'm going to die. I am dying. I am closer to dying every day. And in some sense, this is what Lent is a reminder of. We spend a whole season in the church's life kind of weirdly focusing on dying and death, and that things are wrong and bad, right? Why? Why isn't that some sick practice? It could be, right? And for some of us, maybe it is. Because it's not the only thing Jesus does, right? But I would say we of all people should be able to be present in the darkest shadows. Jesus himself models for us that even as people of faith, or put that aside, because we are people of faith, we can afford to stop and just lose it with grief over what's happening in our own life, over what we've done. With Jesus here, just over what is the inevitability of all of our lives. It has an end. If Jesus himself stops in the middle of the most triumphalistic language in all of the Gospels to break down and cry with Mary, with mourners, first, that tells us something really odd about the God that we worship. We forget this, but this is not the God that most people create. This is not the God that was imagined in the ancient Near East. This isn't what was imagined about the Messiah. This is a God who also comes to us, weeps with us, just like he wept with Mary. That's a very strange God. So we have to be people who practice lament. Now, I'd venture to say that perhaps I tend to be attracted, I've said this before because I also had Lamentations, right? I feel like I'm attracted to churches that kind of lean in to the sad stuff. I don't know. How many of you at Mountainside because you're like, happy clappy people? Not my people. Not my people. Right? To be a church that hungers and thirsts after justice means that we are going to be a church that weeps. To be a church who takes seriously that people are suffering, that each other is suffering, that some of us have lost family and friends and we're worried about biopsies. We want to be a church who can be present in the now and in the moment as life actually is. And Jesus looks squarely at death and all that it does and just breaks down. That's the kind of God that also isn't always preached. But this is what God looks like. And this is what we need to look like. But here's the pickle, I think, for Mountainsiders. Okay, Mountainsiders like me. I'm always preaching to myself, so here we go. He then keeps going. So the Jews say, I love this part. So the Jews say, look how he loved him. So some people are like, oh, isn't that great? He loved him. Now here's me. But some of them said, could not he who have opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Right? How many of you have been there with Jesus too? The Martha, the Mary, these guys who were like, okay, if you're all that, this would not have happened this way. And they're straight up. I think the gospel also gives us that permission. Because Jesus doesn't chide Mary and Martha for being honest about how disappointing God can be. When God doesn't show up, what certainly seems to me to be a good plan, like not dying in the first place. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, comes to the tomb. They tell him to take away the stone. And he says to her again, now we've moved again to, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And by the way, that glory of God thing, okay, so this is one of those terms that I'm always like, what does it even mean, right? This was especially true for me when well, I don't know, in my Catholic church we sang, the kingdom of glory comes, the nation rejoices, and then I sojourned among evangelicals and they were talking about worshiping the glory of God, and I was like, I have no idea what this really means. So I'm going to give you my shot. The glory of God is in part seeing God as God really is. If you hang in, you'll see the glory of God. Again, very triumphalistic language. So the sandwich, right? Smack dab in the middle of the sandwich is lament. Full-bodied, full bore, all in weeping. He says, cries out with loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man, although apparently not dead yet, not truly dead, right? Lazarus gets up. There's also interesting side notes about whether or not they were actually bound. So there may be some language here sort of hinting at something else, like that Jesus is overcoming more than just death here in this unbinding him. Now, I suspect some Mountainsiders, are going to be a bit like me. Okay, just pretend Daniel's not there. Daniel, close your eyes for a moment. How many of you were like, this song, like, it's kind of hard to sing? Did anybody have a hard time singing this song? I always have a hard time with these kinds of songs. Because I'm always but the glass is half empty, you know. Yeah, love's going to conquer the world, like, oh, what? You know, it's like Imagine all over again. But this is the thing that is also gospel for me. Because to be fully human is to hold all of that together. To be Christian or followers of Jesus, this Jesus, is to be present to the weeping and to do that against a backdrop of hope in resurrection. The hard thing is that we're all like Mary and Martha and these Jews. We don't have control over how God works wonders. How is God going to work resurrection? How is God going to bring justice? When is God going to keep? Why does God keep delaying? That's also our reality. But we don't do it as people who have no hope in something else. And I think that's why we can be such great lamenters at Mountainside. Present to pain, which I so appreciate. And I think for some of us, like me, the challenge is to hold on to the good news of resurrection and that promise. But recognize that I can't, any more than Mary and Martha did, I can't tell Jesus the how and the when. And it's never, or feels like, it's never the way that I would have done it. Do you ever feel this way with God? Jesus, you're like, if I were running the universe, I would have skipped this part. So I think there's also honoring the mystery of death and loss and sorrows in our life. And part of honoring that mystery, too, is to be present in the weeping. But we don't weep as people without hope. You see, you don't need hope if things aren't dire. There's no need for hope. And for us not to be completely overwhelmed by our sorrow is for us to also remember the kind of God that we worship. And that's a God who doesn't just we have a plan and the plan is just going according to plan. I mean, which is kind of how he sounds at certain points in this, God's going to glorify himself. It's all going to be great. But that's not the only way this reads. Yes, that's true. God is bigger than I imagine. And in some mysterious way that I don't really understand, God also promises to be present with us in the midst of things that it feels to me like God certainly could have avoided or could fix. And Christian hope is to live into that kind of life. To not know how God's going to resurrect or how God's going to work these things out. But we're in the justice game not because we have control over it, but because we have hope. We have a big horizon against which we work for justice. Because we know that the God we worship, it's not just that God's going to make it all work out in the end. It's also because of the nature of the God that we worship. As we're hungering and thirsting for justice, as we're mourning our family and our friends, this is the God who's also present. Not only the God who holds all of time in some mysterious way, works out awful things in some great grand plan in Romans, right? But also because we have a God who wants to be with us, wants to weep with us, is moved by human sadness, sorrow, loss, confusion, and there is no greater time that all those things are present than in our grief. Many people argue grief is the most complicated of all human emotions. Because we often can't predict how it's going to hit us or when. It just slaps us upside the head. Some of us who've had profound losses recently, you know what I'm talking about. Some of us who are parents, who have deep sorrows, have siblings who are now crippled, the sibling we knew we lost, a constant grief. And like Mary and Martha, I think we can ask and we can come to God and say, why the bleep? Weren't you here when I needed you? Why didn't you work this out another way? Can anybody relate to that? I can relate to that. And the text gives us permission, just like Mary and Martha. Jesus doesn't say, hey, shut up because I'm in charge. I've got this. How dare you question me? Nope. Holds that confusion, gets it, so gets it that he gets lost in it. That's the God that we sang about who is love. Strange, mysterious, not controllable. I hate that part. Is a God with tremendous power who resurrects us from the dead. Another strange thing we can talk about, that's a weird one. Now, here's the last thing I just want to point out about this text. The text goes on. In the Gospel of John, so in the Synoptic Gospels, the thing that really ticks off the religious leaders, does anyone know what it is? They're like, this guy's toast. We are going to get him. He's done. This is over the top. Does anyone remember what it is? It's what? Yes. It's, and tables and turning over the tables. In the Gospel of John, it's this. They're like, okay, you're resurrecting people. Now we need to kill you. Now here's my message for you. Sometimes to be people of hope who live into this is going to tick people off. because they want you to either not be a person who weeps or not be a person of hope. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Youth. So, I hope that you take this text with you. Know that you have a God who is love enough to sit with us in our weeping and in our confusion over our own grief. And who is mysteriously the resurrection and the life.